Thanks for having me. I'm not sure if Clark put the slide up and the crowd thinned a little bit when they saw mathematics. I know that Dr. Bhavnani decided to kind of sneak his math in, kind of like when you're given a shot, you don't tell them it's coming, you good nurses out there. I'm just kind of hitting you with it right now. You're going to get a shot in the arm. No, the math is really just going to be a framework for discussion. It's not meant to tax your brain. That's not my point here, but I do believe that we should look at things through a quantitative lens once in a while. I think it's helpful. We tend to do so with literary metaphors and similes, and why not take a look at the world of mathematics to try to understand something better and maybe better conceptualize it. So that's my goal today, but I think it's important to note that Clark's plan, his master plan, I'm not sure if it succeeded or failed, because I know he was really thinking that he was going to put the name Jeff Fisher in the program, hoping everybody was going to come and sign up in droves and 5 rooms would be filled listening to the former Los Angeles Rams head coach, Jeff Fisher. I am not that Jeff Fisher, just to be clear. But I will use this to kick off the conversation about mathematics. A lot of folks, he left after with a 4-9 record, leaving the Rams in 2016, if you're familiar with him, and he got fired. And then the coach that came and replaced him ended up going to the playoffs the next year, and he's half his age. He had to go into the playoffs the next year and then took him to the Super Bowl this past year. So there's a lot of folks out there that think Jeff Fisher is really maybe not the best coach in the world. And if you look at some statistics, you'd think, yeah, that's real true. He's got 165 career losses. He's literally tied with Dan Reeves, most losses in history of an NFL head coach. And you're thinking, what a bum. But you got to look a little closer at the data. If you look a little closer at the information, you realize he's really only 13 wins away from being in the top 10 of most wins in NFL history. And if you compare him to Oakland Raider coach and sort of everybody favorite John Gruden, you'll see that their winning percentages are almost identical. Their postseason records are within a couple games of each other. Their Super Bowl records, yes, one won their Super Bowl, and Jeff Fisher lost his Super Bowl, but if you remember that game, it was literally they lost it on the 1-yard line. In fact, that's what they call it. They call it the 1 yard short Super Bowl. His career wins are considerably more than Gruden, and yet poor Jeff Fisher can't get a job, and Gruden just signed a $100 million plus deal with the Raiders for 10 years. So is that justification? I don't think so. The moral of this story is statistics aren't going to be a lot of this presentation because you got to be careful of what you read. Statistics are like bikinis. What they reveal is suggestive, but what they conceal is vital. So always dig a little deeper, use your quantitative analysis, think through things, and we're going to have a little fun looking at patient engagement through the lens of mathematics. Before we do that, I will say I'm not this Jeff Fisher. I'm the guy that's from this place. I don't know if you've ever seen it or heard of it before, but it's about halfway between Toronto and Montreal. It's a little tiny town in upstate New York called Clayton. It's about 2,000 people, and we have 2 claims to fame, really only 2. The first is this. Can anybody tell me who these guys are? I'm going to give a massive hint. You're close. You're in the right track. You're in the right flavor. Keep going. Yeah, not quite Kiss. You'd see a little bit more tongue, I think, if it were Kiss. All right, let me give you the hint from one of your own Southern Californian, born and raised, Will Ferrell. Blue Oyster Cult, that's right. The two gentlemen. Let me see if I can use my pointer here. Is this working? How does this work? I'm colorblind. Can you literally see it? This is not going to work for me because I'm colorblind. The third guy in from the left is Albert Bouchard, and his brother Joe is on the far right. They are from Clayton, New York. They are our only claim to fame in the town's history, with one other exception. And I will point this out. That person is, one more time, faith healer Antoine Tétrault. Okay, now I'm actually taking a little bit of a serious turn here. Antoine Tétrault traveled from Montreal to Clayton, New York in the late 1930s, and he was a faith healer. And what he did is he sat and he prayed with patients who couldn't get their ailments fixed elsewhere. And what you see up there, I'll point this and hope it works, is casts, canes, body casts, all kinds of things that the patients would leave behind. What you see hanging from them are testimonials. And he, in theory, or supposedly, cured literally thousands and thousands of patients through the late 1930s, 40s, and 50s. And he passed away in the 1960s. What I find fascinating about Antoine Tétrault as we take a look at some more of his things, here are some of the testimonials, a little bit of a close-up of the testimonial. and a picture of the Syracuse Post-Herald, and there was also a paper picture that I had from the Syracuse Post-Standard of 1939, is that people are still talking about him long after his death. He was not the type of charismatic healer that you would see on like television evangelist shows. That was not who he was. He didn't slap their congregants in the forehead and say, "You're healed, you now have your sight back." What he did is he invited you in, and he might pray for you and with you, directly with you for weeks, sometimes months, and sometimes years. And that's what took the results. People came from many places to see him, and while it may have taken a lot of time, that certainly the results and all of that paraphernalia that was left over by the folks that were cured speaks for itself. Today, 56 years after his death, every year, and this will obviously continue as far as I can see, there's a healing mass for him on the first Saturday of every June. And I want to point out that there was an article, I have a copy of it here, written in the 1971 October version of the New York State Journal of Medicine by a Dr. James Fitzgerald, who was an OBGYN from northern New York, and he studied Antoine Tétreault, and he wrote the following, and I want to quote this. "The imaginary illness is as real to the sufferer as the tangible tumor in another. The distraught mind, the heart and stomach in turmoil, may not show in an electroencephalogram or cardiogram or x-ray film, but their effects are as devastating as any demonstrable disease. Are the unhappy, the grieving, the sad well? Do the neglected, the unloved, the distraught, and the anxious fulfill the criteria for health? This is a pathology predominant in quantity and of a nature that far exceeds in scope that which is encompassed by the leaves of medical texts." He went on to conclude, "Possibly the healing power is nothing more than patience, interest, and concern, all dispensed in large doses. Our hearts and minds do require a certitude, and perhaps this same belief and conviction is as good for our bodies." I'll repeat that. I'll call that the power of caring. Possibly the healing power is nothing more than patience, interest, and concern, all dispensed in large doses. So let's look at this from a little bit less mysterious perspective, and maybe a little bit more quantitative perspective. After all, what are we after with our patients? We want to achieve some form of loyalty built through trust. That's really, I think, generally speaking, most people would say, I want to build loyal relationships with my patients. They continue to come back to me. They believe in me. They have faith in me. So how do we get to loyalty from caring? Well, caring leads to leads to trust. And then once you've built up enough trust, then you've got somebody who's going to be loyal and will continue to come back to you. I don't think that's a great stretch. If we put that in terms of calculus, if you haven't taken calculus, you'll still understand it because it's just English. Loyalty is derived from trust, is a derivative of trust, and trust is a derivative of caring. So let's look at that a little bit more closely. But first, I'll remind you of sort of your calculus that you may not have taken. If not, I promise I'll go easy on you here. The calculus of motion, if we want to do a quick re-lesson, is you notice how fast you need to move, change your distance, change your position. You really have to change a lot of position in a very short period of time, such that really what that means is you're simply increasing your velocity consistently going forward and getting higher on your velocity. What that really means, you're just maintaining a constant rate of acceleration. Let's put that in terms of what we just saw, the calculus of engagement. What this tells us is it tells us in order to maintain a constant positive level of loyalty, you have to constantly be increasing, engendering your trust, and you have to do that through large doses of constantly moving forward caring. So that's what the patient engagement opportunity is for us. It's an opportunity to scale our caring function. I'll say it, that I believe the calculus of engagement is to ensure consistent loyalty. We must increasingly engender trust, which in turn requires large doses of caring. So I choose to look from a mathematical perspective through the lens of what we're trying to do for our patients with our patient engagement initiatives, with our experience initiatives. I like to look at that as scaling our care function. So now I'll go into talking about, all right, now that we've looking through it with that lens, how do we go ahead and build out an engagement ecosystem? And I think that's really what it is. I don't want folks to leave here thinking that provider organizations should be deploying point solutions and only point solutions that are hither and yon and scattered and isolated and stovepiped. I think that you need to, when you're crafting out the concept of patient engagement functions and features, you want to do so in an orderly way. And so one things we help our customers with, and I'll talk through, is curating. First, you got to curate your ecosystem. Pick those things that you think make sense for you and for your environment, for your community members, and then orchestrate them together so that they work nicely together, and then push to make sure that the patients will adopt them and that they'll become successful. So what can we do? We'll start with scaling the caring function through curation. So there's a British anthropologist and evolutionary psychologist by the name of Robin Dunbar who happens to turn 72 today. Dunbar he studied primates for basically his entire professional career, and he determined a number, 150, which has been colloquially referred to now as the monkey sphere, which is the number of people that humans would be able to have stable relationships with, right? And he figured this out through primates. He was able to dissect the brain of a primate and immediately be able to tell how large was that tribe of that primate and be accurate, because it's simply a limitation with respect to our cognition. We simply can't maintain relationships with more than 150 people. So if you got 3,000 LinkedIn followers and connections, good for you, but let's be clear. You're really acquaintances with most of them, but you probably don't care. If one of them were to be in trouble, would you really care? You know, so I think Joseph Stalin said, 1 death is a tragedy, 1,000,000 deaths is a statistic. That's because we only have a monkey sphere. We hear about the typhoons across the world, and while we're sad for it, it doesn't affect us as the loss of a loved one. So the lens that I want to put on this little piece of math here, is how do we curate an ecosystem for engagement? What do we pick? What do we choose to do for our patients? I believe you look at it through the perspective of what would you do for somebody in your monkey sphere, okay? Would you arrange a ride for them if they needed transportation to a critical healthcare appointment? Would you send them flowers if they had a health issue that they need to recover from, or maybe send them balloons if they had a beautiful moment, maybe the birth of a baby? Would you provide them education if you happen to be knowledgeable about the field? Would you help them with their recovery or their rehab if they asked? Would you take the charge of, updating all of the family and friends? Everybody's got a friend like that, right? The one who will do all the updating for everybody else when some news happens. Would you be that person? What would you do for them? And if you look at it through that perspective, I think you'll find that some features maybe rise to the top and others may shrink. At least that's the perspective that I'm taking. Here's somebody from my monkey sphere. Her name is Gina Burris. She is the wife of our lead architect, our lead database architect, and I've been friends with her for 23 years, since our sons were born. And I want to point this out to you. This is a patient engagement. This is literally patient engagement incorporated right here. So Gina says, this is a Facebook post that I have permission for everybody to see. She said, sure, go show it. She said, just when I thought I couldn't love this company any more than I already did, this happens. I simply chatted via an online messenger to ask if I could return unopened medications we purchased for Mildred. Mildred is her dog, okay? Of course, they said yes, offered me words of sympathy, and said they would credit the card and send a return label. Then this arrived yesterday. I will forever be a Chewy.com customer. They are absolutely the best company I have ever dealt with. And I know what you're thinking. We're providers. We can do that. We do that. Many of us go ahead and send a card at the passing of a loved one who happened to maybe die in our hospital. I get that. This was October 17th of 2018. But do you do this? I truly have no words for how awesome this company is, Gina says in a Facebook post on April 22nd. You can tell this was from a CRM. It's almost 6 months to the day that this came out. Shortly after Mildred passed, they sent flowers today. I received this in the mail. It's like an unexpected gift for this sweet girl that I miss so much. Chewy.com is the shit, is what she says. Now, there are complicated things you can do technologically to build loyalty and trust and to show that you care for your patients, but there's also things that you can do that aren't that terribly complicated. Just keep that as a framework for where we're headed. I'll segue now into some more math. Metcalfe's law, harnessing the network effect. The concept here is that Metcalfe's law, if you're not familiar with it, it states that the value of a network of things, typically computers, maybe people in a social network, is how it's referred to, but the value of that network is proportional to the square of the number of nodes, or the number of members, right? So it increases in value very, very fast when you add members. Think of Alexander Graham Bell picking up the phone. He's got one guy to talk to. That doesn't have a lot of value. But today, we couldn't live without our computers and our internet, right? Well, so if you think about that in the context of a patient engagement ecosystem, and I show this and I illustrate this. This is from one of our customers. It happens to be from Inspira Health Network in South Jersey. They're in the Philadelphia market, and I'll probably refer to them again. And I am not necessarily endorsing or not endorsing any of the companies that you see, but what's going on here is that all of these different vendors have been brought into an engagement ecosystem. iHealth at the top left is a device manufacturing. It's a device company for remote monitors and wearables. You guys know what Azure and Microsoft Dynamics is, a CRM. You know what Cerner is. Get Well Loops is sort of a health tasking kind of a functionality. Zipnosis is like a medical triage where you can maybe get your kid's strep throat taken care of by answering a bunch of questions, and a provider will call you back with a script. It's not specifically telehealth, though. It's not video. CareTech is the developer of a website, a content management system, which is what Inspira's website is on. Taylor Healthcare does e-forms. iDog is the Dutch vendor that we partner with for wayfinding. Jellyfish is a sort of a get-in-line patient transparency wait time kind of thing, where they have software that allows you to save your place in line for urgent care and that kind of stuff. And Orchestration Health is a health risk assessment vendor. Last one I think is Validic, which is a device aggregator. They aggregate information from a number of different remote monitoring devices. This app functions with all of those vendors in play. The challenge is how to make it seamless. So when I talk about Metcalfe's law and harnessing the network effect, I genuinely believe that stovepiped, these features are less valuable than when we weave them together. So it's much more powerful to tie instructions for wayfinding your way around the hospital into an appointment reminder. It's more valuable to connect wearables to these health tasks so that we can see what's going on with a patient. If they've been asked to take their blood pressure 3 times a day while they're not in the hospital or while they're not at the practice in between visits, wouldn't it be nice if we had attestation of that through a monitor, through a remote monitoring device? When we weave these things together and allow them to work in harmony with each other, we create a much greater value proposition for that engagement ecosystem. So, what have we learned so far? We want to scale our care functions and consider capabilities that would be fit for somebody in our monkey sphere. We want to consider the power in networking capabilities to create more meaningful and more interesting and more valuable engagement-related workflows. And then last but not least, in order to finish up and know what do we got to go get into our ecosystem, we have to rank them. How do we figure out, which systems, which types of capabilities we should go and get and put into our engagement ecosystem? For this, we turn to the Google PageRank algorithm. I don't know if anybody's familiar with this. It's quite interesting. It's named for Larry Page, believe it or not, even though what it does is rank Google pages. When you do a Google search and the results come up, it goes like this. I'll use the example of me sitting on the panel before. My website, I can go create my Intraprise Health website, and I can connect it to Citrix, and I can create a link out to Microsoft, and I can create a link out to AT&T, right? That's wonderful. But I don't get any power from that unless they link back. They're the power. I get power when Microsoft says, wow, that Intraprise Health company, that's important. I'm going to go ahead and create a link back. This is what Google mastered. This is the massive technology lift that they did in the very early days of this search engine. And it's all done with actually relatively blocking and tackling math. The implementation and execution of it by Google was very, very challenging, but the math is not complicated, and it has utility outside of just ranking web pages. Let me show you what I mean. Well, first, before I show you what I mean, I will also show you that Google PageRank is the reason why I'm not even in the first 17 pages of a Google search on my name, Jeff Fisher, as we've probably already established. So what we do is we take the feature sets that we think and the capability sets that might be offered by a number of different vendors, and we put them in a matrix. We put them along the top, we put them along the side. And each cell is essentially a cage match. Each cell is a game, right? Each cell we say, if the top beats the side, we put a 1. If the top loses to the side, we put a 0. You can use this for your kid's soccer tournament. If it's like a round-robin soccer tournament, this will give you a much better ranking than anything that's going to end with a tiebreaker that says, total goals scored or points against or whatever. That's a much worse tiebreaker. This is much better. When we put this into matrix and run some matrix math on it, the math is called linear algebra. That's not important. But what is important is using something like a Google PageRank algorithm. We fill this out, and I filled this out with an eye toward, one, scaling the care function. Does the thing that we're talking about do a lot to care and extend our ability to care using digital tools? And two, does it support the network effect? Is it an enhancer of other features, or is it something that just has to stand alone and is unable to be enhanced? And what we ended up with is this. And again, this is subjective. This was through my lens. I would encourage anybody in their own health systems to run through this themselves. It's a quantitative way to look at how to rank what you should go do from an engagement ecosystem. What I see coming to the top, and it's not a surprise to me, is customer relationship management. I mean, the thing that we showed with the Chewy.com example can be easily done with a customer relationship management. A customer relationship management system can tie data and can be that interstitial tissue between other feature sets. It can be the thing that can send an appointment reminder with wayfinding instructions from two different platforms. One platform tells you that you've got an appointment coming up. The other platform has a link from the endpoints of the wayfinding inside the hospital. You put them together. A CRM can be the orchestration engine behind that. I'm not surprised that came up number one. Price transparency and estimation comes up number two in our list because it is the single most requested feature set out there right now, even though it's one of the ones that is not available. The most anxious thing people have to deal with in the healthcare world is knowing what they have to pay for it in America right now. That's a biggie. Wayfinding is up there high because it's an enhancer. It can plug into self-scheduling. It can plug into appointment reminders. It's a big-time enhancer, and we also look at it as something that really lowers the stress. I won't go through the litany of items. I just wanted to show you that this is a technique that we decided that we could use and thought it was a neat way of representing how we would go about building out our engagement ecosystem. Last but not least, when you go and you start saying, all right, I'm going to go bake off a bunch of vendors. I got to go bake off a bunch of CRM vendors to see what I want to do. There's a thing out there known as the optimal stopping algorithm. You might have heard of this. It actually applies to just about anything where you need to stop. The primary example would be like you're going to buy a house. You need to buy a home. You got 3 months to do it because you got nowhere to live and you just sold your old home, right? If you got 3 months to find your house, the conventional wisdom and the probability in the math says at 37%, after that, you take the next one that's better than all the other ones and you stop, okay? So at 30, so roughly, if you've got 3 months to go, after month one, you've looked at 3, 4, 5 houses. After month one, the next house that's better than all 5 of those houses, you take it. The same could be true here of applying this for when you're curating your ecosystem. If you've looked at, there's 18 CRM vendors that I can think of off the top of my head. There's the big ones like Salesforce and Microsoft Dynamics, but then there's a litany of smaller ones you can entertain. My feeling is you start with a handful, but you take advantage of this optimal stopping algorithm, and you don't take it all the way to the finish line. You get to a point, use that 37% number, or if you really think that you can, the number is debatable for what we're trying to do because the optimal stopping algorithm does expect that once you've passed one over, you can't get it back. But we know these are vendors. You can always go back to them and say, oh, hey, I passed you over before, but will you do business with me now? And the answer is yes, so maybe I'll say it's closer to 50%. But that's an idea. So that's the concept of how you would curate and pull together an ecosystem of features and functions. So now once we've done that, we want to go and bring order to all of our chaos. We now need to orchestrate these feature sets together. And this is where it gets a little bit hairy and interesting. And sometimes there's just problems, not solutions. This is a look at a number of different features at Inspira, okay, where we've done a lot of work. And you'll see just the massive overlap in this drawing that's known as an Euler diagram. Leonhard Euler was a Swiss mathematician who's one of the most famous mathematicians of all time. He created this type of drawing and this type of capability before John Venn came along and created what everybody else knows as the Venn diagram. So this predates the Venn diagram. What this shows, though, at a glance, and the reason I had my son do it because it was too mathematically straining for me. I'm not very good spatially. I literally built what each vendor does into a matrix, and I gave it to my son and said, you're smarter than me. Can you build a drawing that represents this, an Euler diagram? And he did it for me. I'm not recommending anybody go try to build an Euler diagram of their overlap. What I'm trying to say is you are going to run into massive overlap when you're trying to curate your ecosystem, and you're going to have to make decisions. Do I try to get what I need from this, from this vendor if they already have it, or am I sacrificing too much because their version of that feature set is not industry best? There's another dimension of overlap that's important too, and I start calling this the paradox of healthcare consumerization. Of the vendors that we have in play out there, that at least that I've got on this screen, there's actually probably a couple more at Inspira. You'll notice that all but two of them don't require identity or consent necessarily, but all the rest of them require to identify who the patient is as a consumer, requires some form of consent model to that vendor's platform, and also offers some form of stovepipe reporting and analytics specific only to what that platform has. Can you imagine the chaos? Now, you're supposed to run your engagement ecosystem, and you're supposed to understand the efficacy of the initiatives you've engaged with and whether or not they're successful. You've got statistics and data coming in about people that are using your get in line function, self-scheduling function, your provider finder function. They're using telehealth. They're doing wayfinding. They're going through all this, and they're using e-forms to sign their HIPAA consents before they come into the practice. You've deployed all this technology, but in order to understand if it works, you've got to go to all these different systems to find that data. The engagement ecosystem architecture that you can look at is one that has this middle layer called platform that really lives in the cloud and kind of centralizes a bunch of the features that we're talking about. Management of identity, management of consent, the ability to instrument some of these different engagement ecosystem vendors' capabilities so that you can report on them in one place and have one set of dashboards with maybe some of the critical data. And it also has an infrastructure layer below that connects to, that could be just in a database, but I would recommend, even if you don't implement it on top of a CRM, that you have a connection to a CRM. I believe a CRM is a foundational piece of software for an engagement ecosystem. I believe the CRM becomes your engagement source of truth. You've got a clinical source of truth, it's your electronic medical record system. You've got financial and administrative sources of truth in your revenue systems, in your financial systems, right? What you need and you don't, I bet you don't have, is a system that's recording everything that your patients and consumers are doing to engage with you. In that respect, I think it makes sense to have a CRM in your arsenal. And then if you abstract this platform level, which is where all the logic is. The engagement level is essentially talking about being all the apps, right? So that I don't even know if I'm doing that. I can't see it at all. But the engagement level is where all the apps would be. That platform level lets you take some of the logic of what you're trying to do and create a circumstance where you can actually deploy out to a multitude of different channels. So I don't know if you've given a lot of thought yet to what you might want to do. Do you want an app in the App Store? Do you want just responsive websites that you want to deliver this content to for your customers? Don't forget about your older folks who still need to call the telephone. So you need to have a customer service application that's recording those engagement, capabilities, or those times that those people are engaging. You need that as well in an access center. And last but not least, we did a lot of talking today about bots. Some of your millennials are going to want to work with bots. So you have to make this decision about what it is you want to go and how you want to deploy your engagement ecosystem. You're going to find that most of the vendors you interact with that have feature sets to engage patients have their own app, or they've got their own responsive website. Maybe or maybe not, they have an SDK or a software development kit that would allow you to embed the features of that app into a custom single branded app for your health system. That's what we recommend. Think about these things when you do source selection on your vendors. And then winding down a little bit here, I've just got a list of important considerations. They're not necessarily mathematically oriented in any way, but think about whether or not you want to do a launch that's native app or responsive web, because my senior architect told me recently when I asked him, I said, can't we write software for, whatever it happens to be, self-scheduling or a front end to wayfinding or whatever. Can't we write that software once and press a button in the development environment that says responsive web, and then press another button that says iOS and Android? And he said, Jeff, there's no free lunch. It's a heavier lift to have both of those things running around, but you do have constituents who are going to want to use those. I know when I came out here last night, and when I leave later on, I use my American Airlines app the actual native Android app for the boarding process. It brings me my QR code. I'm taking advantage of some of the native features of the phone. I really enjoy that. But when I'm booking my travel, weeks ago, I'm on my computer and I'm looking at the flight options. I'm in a responsive website at that point in time. There's a case to be made that we need all of it if we really want to engage our consumers, properly and engage them anywhere they might want to be at a given point in time, but there does come at a cost. So depending upon what you need and depending upon how important it is and what your goals are for consumerization and engaging your patients, you may decide, no, I'm just going to do a responsive web, and if they need to access it from their smartphone, it'll still look nice. That's okay, but you will be sacrificing the ability to use some of those key native features of the phone, the gyroscopes, the accelerometers, the camera, the GPS. All of those things you're sacrificing. So if you're going to curate apps into your ecosystem down the road that need those, you're going to need to think about that in advance. Transactional versus relationship. Second one down. Is there a case for multiple standalone apps? I try to convince health systems that I work with, you really should have one primary transactional app. If you're going to put an app in the App Store, My Scripts, put that in the App Store, and everything you need, you get there. And without a doubt, at least on the East Coast, when I go and do Play Store or App Store searches on health systems that I'm about to go talk to, I find a litany of apps. And they're disconnected. They don't have anything to do with each other. And trust me, the consumers are getting confused. They're like, what app do I use? I talk about consolidating it, but there is a case to be made where if you're going to create an app that maybe is very specific to a service line that you have, maybe you are the world's greatest expert in OBGYN and you've created the world's greatest pregnancy app. I call that more of a relationship-oriented app rather than a transactional app. That's not to get you into urgent care. That's not to help you find your way through the hospital. That's not to help you schedule your appointment. That's to help you manage your pregnancy, maybe it's high risk, through an extended period of time where the time you spend in that app is much greater on average than the time you might spend in a transactional app. That would be the only case where I would suggest it might make sense to have more than one app in the App Store. Anonymous versus authenticated. If you're going to put an app in the App Store for your health system with engagement-related features, give them something for nothing to start with. Don't make them initially, and I know I'm saying this to a bunch of folks who probably have most of their stuff in MyChart or most of their stuff in Cerner's patient portal. If that's the case, the challenge, what I'm saying I don't like is the very first thing you have to do to even use it once is you got to log in, you got to create an account, you got to give them all this information. If you have the option and you decide to build an app that's separate from your MyChart or separate from your Cerner app or whatever, I would strongly suggest giving them anonymous features to look at. If you remember the app that I showed before, there were boxes on the top and then there were circles down below. All of the circles were anonymous features. The boxes represented those that required personalization. I could go back again and show that if you need me to, but long story short is give them something for nothing. Let them download it from the App Store and immediately get value from it. That will help build some of that trust, which will, of course, eventually engender some of that loyalty. And then last but not least, cool tech versus genuine caring. You know, it drives me nuts to see people going down the path of thinking that they have to have cool tech for the sake of cool tech. Steve Jobs says you've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology. And he said that after realizing that he had been making that mistake for many years of not doing that. Starting with this really cool tech and saying, what can I do with this cool tech? My answer is to say, no, don't worry. It's not about cool tech. It's about human relationships. It's about caring. It's about lowering anxiety. Think about that first and say, all right, now what is the best way to deliver that? This is a case in point that most wayfinding systems that you see out there that you can buy are based upon this blue dot technology, and yet it is known that that stuff is really hard to cognitively deal with. When you're walking through indoors and you're trying to navigate and you're looking at yourself on a picture of a map as a blue dot and you're supposed to figure out if you're going left or right and the dot's moving down but you're moving forward, there's nothing more cognitively demanding than that. The science is on the side of something like this, which is the ability to, let me see if I can get this running. This is photo landmark navigation. You pick your endpoints. We're going to go from the main lobby to the ICU family waiting room, 4th floor. It's going to give me a couple hints on what I need to do to start my navigation. It's going to tell me you simply need to swipe to the next picture when you see it, and that's all you got. So now this, to me, even though it's simpler, it's not cool tech, it's photographs. There is some cool tech in the back end, some graphing algorithms that pull it all together. But this is something that people can get their, now forget the fact that I've sped it up for purposes of this presentation. You're not walking that fast, but hopefully you're getting the gist. The idea here is don't go pollute your hospital with 30,000 beacons when you can take pictures and have a better outcome. And that's just one example of many. Cool tech is on the horizon, and a lot of this gets lost in cool tech. Last but not least, we curate, we orchestrate, and then we push for adoption. And my catchphrase here is adoption is a deliverable. You can't just deploy technology and say, we're done. You have to do things to make sure that your public knows about it, that you're pushing for that adoption. Typically, when you're doing marketing, you have this incidence of consideration where you're doing traditional marketing through ad campaigns, email campaigns, radio spots, social media marketing, and maybe 1.5% of the people will consider your product, and then only 0.2% of them are going to buy it, right? That's according to some studies that I've and the study I've sort of attributed here. Word of mouth, on the other hand, from somebody who's a trusted person is much greater. You're going to have 80% consider what they say, and 35% of them are going to do it. What I'm telling you is the simplest thing you can do for adoption is you own your points of care. You own the facilities that people are walking in and out of. Build a culture to stop the person and say, you really should download our app. It's going to make it so much easier for you next time you come and do this. You can schedule online. You can complete your forms online. You can find your way around the hospital. You can do all. You can find price estimations for what you need for your next procedure, whatever you have to do. That is the way to drive adoption in our experience. And last but not least, I mentioned this before on the panel. Historically, the interaction in the healthcare environment between marketing operations and the IT department has been a little bit of overlap, but it is you got to be tied at the hip now. That's why you see this merging of so many titles of executives, right? The chief innovation officer, the chief experience officer is really somebody who sits in the middle here, right? Build that culture in your organization, because if you don't, you only really get one bite at the apple. And I'll finish with mentioning how important it is to measure everything you're learning from customers and patients that are engaging with this new ecosystem that we've just curated, orchestrated, and built up. I'll give you this example here. This example is, I find it interesting, the things you learn that you don't expect to learn. This is, again, from our friends in South Jersey at Inspira. If you look, you'll see that the third most requested referral over a period of time is for pain management. And that kind of jumped out at me. I didn't think they had a big pain management department at Inspira. And then I went and I looked at Definitive Healthcare's numbers for stats for pain management, and they tend to be less than or around 1% of all referrals are for pain management. And yet Inspira is going on having 9% of the calls into their call center, into their access center for pain management. Then I noticed that the average distance that people are willing to travel for their pain management referral is greater than any other specialty. Well, clearly what we learned is they were having a little bit of a crisis with some of the people continuing to repeat call and looking. It was clearly an opioid thing going on. And what we were able to do is work with the triaging of the access center, that when these folks call in and they're looking for a pain management referral, you might want to just triage them right up to a nurse right away and maybe see if we can care for them a little bit better and see what the real problem is that's going on. So you'd be surprised what you'd learn. Last but not least, before I take questions, Antoine Tatro, the faith healer in Clayton, New York, was my great-grandfather. That's all. That's all I have.